Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope all of you are keeping well and your family members too. Today I've come up with a new video where I have tried explaining about DevSecOps. Yes, there are various videos and blogs available over the internet that explains about DevSecOps. But as usual, as part of this video, I have tried capturing all my learnings and experiences which I have gained while working on the DevSecOps practices. So to begin with, let's start with why. Why DevSecOps? So before we start, let's understand the three pieces that involves in the DevSecOps. So Dev meaning development, Sec is security, and Ops is operations. So basically, if we combine in development, security, and operation, that becomes DevSecOps. I'm sure you guys have heard about DevOps, right? Which is nothing but development and operations. So if we club all of them, it becomes the development operations. Similarly, as part of DevSecOps, we have introduced a new phase called security, right? So as we all know, the security is always considered as a isolated process where there will be a dedicated security team who generally performs the necessary security audit, security scans of the application. But in today's world, it is equally important to bring the security into the culture or into the automation process of DevOps. And if you do so, that becomes the DevSecOps. Now question comes, why DevSecOps? Right? So as I mentioned, we have to introduce security in every phases of the development life cycle. Right? And if we do so, what we are going to achieve? So the main advantage, if you introduce security at each phases, then the main advantage would be to ensure that almost zero vulnerabilities are present in all the components that are being used for an application, right? So if we keep the security aside, are we going to get first of all, are we going to get the awareness of vulnerabilities in all the components that are being used for an application? As per me, no. Because there is no security is introduced at any stages, then how we are going to know if any vulnerabilities are present in the code base that we have written or in the infrastructure that we have used? We are not going to know that, right? And that's where DevSecOps brings the culture. And that is what about the DevSecOps. So if you look at the next point where I have tried explaining what is DevSecOps. It's an approach to culture, automation, and platform design that integrates security as a shared responsibility throughout the development lifecycle. And if we share the responsibility of all the, in all the components, then only we can say that almost zero vulnerabilities are present in all the components. So soon we'll be seeing what all components I'm referring to, and then why I'm saying that if you introduce security in all the components, then we are going to get the necessary vulnerabilities, and then how we can address those vulnerabilities. Soon we'll be discussing all of them. But overall, this is the power of security, right? So if you introduce the security at every stages, and if you perform the necessary scan, that gives the necessary vulnerabilities or possible vulnerabilities that may present into the code base. And if we have the vulnerabilities available beforehand, before we release any application or feature to the production, if we have that present beforehand, then of course we can take the necessary or corrective actions. And that's the culture or process DevSecOps talks about. Now question comes, how we are going to achieve that? Well, there are various tools available in the internet that you can make use of. Some of them are open source, some of them are commercial, and based on the use cases and the requirement, yes, you can make use of or choose the necessary libraries and perform the necessary scans at every stages to get the possible vulnerabilities if there are any, right? So now let's understand the components that I'm referring to. So these are the three components I'm referring to for an application development lifecycle, right, at high level. So first one is front-end, back-end, and then infrastructure. So in front-end, if you notice, I mentioned dynamic app security testing. Because, so let's start with front-end, okay? So in the front-end, what we generally do, we choose any framework or libraries like Angular, React.js, Vue.js, right? So these are like library or frameworks that we use to build our front-end application. And once we do, what we do? We proceed to the next phase where we try to integrate the backend APIs or basically APIs to meet the specific requirement. And once all these things are done, we generally host this application in our infrastructure and then we simply access the application. But during this entire cycle, there are very rare case where we talk about the security, and even if we have that, security phases comes at the later stage. But if we talk about the DevSecOps, which is basically brings a culture to introduce the security at every stages. So in the front end, if we talk about what are the security scans and tools that we are going to use to ensure that almost zero vulnerabilities are present, or even if any vulnerabilities are present, we'll be having that information beforehand so that we can start acting on that, right? So from the front end side, we can do possible security testing like penetration testing, and then we can perform the code scan analysis, right? So for all these things, we have tools available. Soon I'll be explaining the workflow as well as the tools that we can make use of that and the experiences that I have on those tools. Similarly, if you go to backend, where I have mentioned SAST, which is static app security testing, then for this also, let's say there are like various microservices or many microservices are present in our code base. Now what all measures we take in terms of security? Are we performing the necessary scan to see if any vulnerabilities are present or not, right? So for that also we have a tool that we can make use of to perform the necessary scan. And same thing goes for infrastructure, where we say SIAC, security infrastructure as a code, right? So in today's world where cloud has evolved in a way that you don't have to spend much time and money to set up the infrastructure. So basically you will be writing a few configuration and code that will spin up the necessary or expected number of environment or instances that you wanna make use of. Now, while writing that code or that sort of code which performs all these operations, are those steps and configuration following the basic standards or necessary standards that are being defined with respect to the cloud services? Are there any security loopholes present? Right? So to find all those things, you have to do necessary scan. You have to perform necessary scan. And how you're going to perform that scan, which tools or libraries you are going to make use of, right? So soon I'll be explaining about all those things. But overall, these are the three components where I was referring in the previous slide where I was mentioning that we have to bring security process in place for all these three components. We can't wait at the end to perform the final security scan or audit. We have to bring the security at every component so that we'll be having all the possible vulnerabilities identified beforehand, and we can make the necessary or take the necessary actions on all those vulnerabilities, right? So let's move to the next slide and let's see and let's understand the workflow. So as you see for the front end, right, what is the general workflow? So as I mentioned, the first phase is what? As soon as we get the requirement, we start the development, And once we are done with the development, push the code, perform the necessary automation test if there are any written, build the app and deploy it, and done. Right? And automation test, build, deployment, and all those things are taken care by our operations team as part of our CI/CD. Now in this general workflow, there is no security scan or security practices are introduced. And that's where, if you look at the next section, where workflow plus security, right? And where the security comes into the picture as part of the CI/CD pipeline. So let's try to understand with a real life example. Let's say we have an application and a feature has forget about there was like a necessary scan was performed or not. But let's say we have an application and a new requirement has come where we have to do the necessary development, and then finally once it is ready, release this to production. So as you see in the general workflow, what we do is we simply start the development, push the code once it is ready, and then start the CI/CD. And then CI/CD has like several stages where we do the automation test, build it, and deploy it, right? But if you introduce the security process, then the flow would be the development begin, code push, and then as part of CI/CD, we start the CV scan as well, which is common vulnerability exposure scan. And if any failure or if any vulnerabilities are identified during this scan, then we are going to hold this entire process. We are not going to perform the build, deployment, and then finally releasing this to production. No, we are not going to do this. And that's the power of the security practices, bringing the security practices as part of our each phases, right? So we don't have to wait till the end and assume a case where let's say there are some vulnerabilities present and you have released that application or feature to the production, and then later stage you have identified the vulnerabilities. Then what you are going to do? And that's where the panic mode will start, and everything will come into one place where several teams will come into one place in the same table, and they'll discuss about all these things. But why to go to that stage if we have a certain process and practices involved? And if we simply introduce that, we are going to simply get rid of that, right? And that's where the security comes into the picture. So this is about the front end, right? So in the previous slide, I was mentioning about the penetration testing. So penetration testing, if you ask me, yes, we can perform this penetration testing at both the phases. Like you may perform this testing at the later stage of the development, or as soon as the development gets over, you may start the penetration testing. But it depends on the application size. Let's say if application size is small, then yes, penetration testing can be done quickly. But if it is a bigger application, then it may take hours or maybe sometime days, right? So generally what we do is, as a practice, yes, we perform the penetration testing, but end of the development we don't block the CI/CD while doing the penetration testing. Having said that, if you keep the penetration testing aside, then yes, if you remember in the previous slide, I did mention about the code scan, right? So it's very important that we do perform the code scan as well, and that should be a part of our CI/CD, right? So let's say we in the same example, if you have developed a feature and and for that we have written a necessary code, and if that code has some vulnerabilities, for example, if you have used any libraries that has some vulnerabilities, and that vulnerabilities, if that are not getting highlighted during the CI/CD pipeline, then we may fall into the same problem. So in order to avoid that, we have to ensure that necessary code scan is also performed beforehand. before we start the deployment or before we start the even build process, right? So the necessary scans are performed. And as I said, there's the security process and cultures comes into the picture. Similarly, the similar flow is applies to backend as well, where we'll be having the general workflow, right? Okay, accidentally I mentioned workflow security as well, but here if you look at, there is no security into this workflow, but we do have security in this phase, right? So same example, where if you perform development, you start the development, push the code, and then before you start the further automation test or build or anything, automation test may come before CV scan, but again I have kept this automation test at the later stage, but as I said, you may keep this automation test beforehand as well. But the important part here is initiate CV scan, right? And this should be part of our either GitHub Actions or CI/CD pipeline, or we can keep at both the places. Now, if you look at this workflow, I mentioned that if as soon as we initiate the CV scan, check if any high or critical vulnerabilities are present or not. If yes, stop the process here. We are not allowed to release that code to the production because it has the vulnerabilities, and it is our responsibility as a developer or as an engineer. It is our responsibility to address that identified vulnerabilities, and again after making the necessary changes or doing the necessary correction, again push the code, go through the same process, and if there is no vulnerabilities present, then proceed with the further steps where we'll be doing the automation test, build, and then finally deploy it. So this is a workflow everyone all of us we can follow as a practice, so that we will ensure that almost zero vulnerabilities are present in our final release, right? So this is about the front-end and back-end application. Now let's move to the next component, which is infrastructure. So security in infrastructure as code, and as I have explained earlier, infrastructure as a code basically is nothing but we are writing a code which does the necessary automation process, and finally at the end it brings the server, or it brings up the server and instances which we are looking for. So for example, if I ask you to, let's say, create a server, right, where we have to host an application, what generally we do, we have to have a dedicated system where we have to install necessary applications, and then assign the or basically add the necessary hardware and network resources and all those things, right? But in today's world, where cloud has emerged so rapidly, where it allows us to have a code base or a necessary configuration, and if you apply that necessary configuration and execute that code, it automatically creates the necessary infrastructure. It provisions the necessary infrastructure that we are looking for, and everything will be handled by the defined configuration. So there are various ways to do it. I have shared one video where I have tried explaining about the how we can provision EC2 instances in AWS through the Elastic Beanstalk. You can, if you're interested, you can go through that tutorial as well. But this is exactly what I'm referring to. IAC is basically refers to that specific explanation that I have shared in the earlier videos, where I've written a necessary configuration and a shell script, which basically as soon as you execute that shell script, it reads the configuration that I have defined, and based on that configuration, it provisions the necessary infrastructure that we needed for our applications to be hosted, right? Now the question comes is, whatever the configuration we have written, are those configurations are standard? Let's say if you're using AWS as a cloud service, so are we following the necessary and best practices that AWS suggests us, right? Now how will you know that? So in order to identify that, we have to perform some scan, right? And that's where SIAC comes into the picture. There are various tools available again, which allows us to perform the necessary scan, and if any loopholes are present into those, it gives the result after that scan, and based on that result we can take the corrective action. And I have mentioned a few tools like CheckOV, TFLint, CloudSploit, and Aquasec. Personally, I have experience with Aquasec. I have done the end-to-end implementation of Aquasec, where I have automated the entire steps. So when I say entire steps, like from the performing a scan to getting the outcome, and from that outcomes, if any high critical vulnerabilities are present, get that outcome, create the ticket out of that, and assign the respective team members. That scan results, if any high and critical vulnerabilities are present, extract the result, create a necessary tickets into the Jira board, and then assign that tickets to the respective lead engineer or engineer. So I have done this entire end-to-end automation using Aquasec. But overall, this is what I'm referring to, SIAC, security infrastructure as a code, right? So we have to perform all these necessary scan in the infrastructure component as well, right? Now final stage is placing the security tools at the right places. So what is the objective? As we discussed, this is to ensure that necessary practices and processes are in place to secure our code and use dependent libraries, containers, and IAC, which is nothing but infrastructure as a code. So for front end, as I was explaining earlier, we can do pen testing, and the experience which I have with is Zap and Burpsuite. Burpsuite, I have a little experience. I don't have like extensive experience, but Zap I have used extensively. I have done the automation of pen testing as well as API testing through Zap, and dependency libraries scan. These are the tools which I'm familiar with, which is Trivy and Snyk. I have done the automation of from the scanning these libraries that are being used in the code base, from scanning to getting the outcome, integrating with GitHub or GitLab Actions, and if any failure or success, then trigger the necessary emails to the assigned engineer, and then if any failure, then blocks it in between, so that necessary that specific code base won't go to the further stages, right? So all this integration and automation I have done through the Trivy. And similarly for code quality and security scan, I do have extensive experience on the Sonarcloud and Sonarcloud both. I have shared many videos and on Sonarcloud and Sonarcloud, so you guys may go through these videos as well. Now similarly for backend, where we can perform the dependencies library scan using Trivy and Snyk, and then similarly we can perform the code quality and security scan as well. And again, I have used the Sonarcloud and or Sonarcloud tool. So as I mentioned, I have shared the many videos, like 3 to 4 videos on Sonarcloud and Sonarcloud. So if you guys are interested, you can go through all of them. And IAC, infrastructure as a code. Again, we can make use of Trivy and Snyk library to perform the necessary scan, and for the AWS resources or any cloud resources scan, just to ensure that the configuration that we have used are as per the standard or not. So to perform all these scans and finding the necessary loopholes, if there are any, we can make use of these tools, right? And I have listed the tools in the previous slide as well, but I do have experience or extensive experience on the Aquasec side. So overall, these are the workflow and tools that we may make use of, and try integrating all these tools and libraries as part of our development lifecycle to ensure that security phases or processes are brought into the culture of the development lifecycle. And if we do so, the benefit, you can understand it has like many benefits, right? It saves time, it saves money, and it saves a lot of overhead from each of us, each engineers for the respective components or respective department, right? And all these things are defined and processed under the DevSecOps, and that's what DevSecOps talks about. Overall, yes, it's a culture, it's a practice, it's a process that every engineer or every in every project we should bring in, and we should make use of at most benefit to avoid the necessary things, or from the security point of view, we should avoid the making sure that we are not dealing with any security exposures or any security concerns at the end. Let's ensure that everything is brought in the first phase itself, meaning during the development life cycle itself, right? So this is what I have tried capturing all these experiences based on my experiences. So I've tried capturing all these tools and all this workflow, and if you guys are interested to know more about this workflow, like how we can integrate these tools or these libraries for all these front-end, back-end, and infrastructure as a code, how we are going to introduce or integrate these tools, in short, how we are going to automate all these entire processes, please let me know. If you need any further help, I'll be definitely more happy to do a further explanation and some explanation from the practical experiences as well, right? Yeah, so that's all from the DevSecOps side, and as I mentioned, I have done the necessary I have prepared the necessary videos in the Sonarcloud side, where many viewers have asked me to integrate the Sonarcloud or Sonarcube as part of GitHub Actions. But as we discussed, we shouldn't only focus on the code quality and security. We should also focus on the other portions like pen testing, and how we can perform the scans on the dependent libraries that we are using as part of our code base, and also what additional steps or secure steps we are taking to perform the scan on the infrastructure as a code side, right? So that also we should think about. And as I said, if you guys are interested to know for further help to integrating all these security practices for all these components, please do let me know in the comment section. Definitely I'll try to answer or respond as soon as I see that. For now, thank you for watching this video. I hope I have shared my experience in a way that it may make some sense and some use in your day-to-day practices that you guys are doing it. Again, for further contact, if you need any questions or if you need any help or any inputs, you can contact me in this link as well. At the same time, you can add a comment in this video as well, and as soon as I see them, I'll try to respond as soon as possible. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you soon. Thank you.